Yes, but let us at the hard work, I should say, no, the thing was done in a hurry, but effectively way.
Nonetheless, very fascinating. I enjoyed it very much. I'd like to shift the focus a bit and talk about the early poetry of Borges and his friends. And I'd like to begin this by reading his Borges poem, Invocación a Joyce. And most of you have copies of this, I think, and you can follow along. This pretty much summarizes, I think, Borges' attitudes toward the literature of the 20s.
Oh, it does indeed.
Thank you. Dispersos en dispersas capitales, solitarios y muchos, jugábamos a ser el primer Adán que dio nombre a las cosas. Por los vastos declives de la noche, que lindan con la aurora, buscamos, lo recuerdo aún, las palabras de la luna, de la muerte, de la mañana y de los otros hábitos del hombre. Fuimos el imagismo, el cubismo, los conventículos y sectas, que las crédulas universidades veneran. Inventamos la falta de puntuación, la omisión de mayúsculas, las estrofas en forma de paloma de los bibliotecarios de Alejandría. Ceniza la labor de nuestras manos y un fuego ardiente nuestra fe. Tú, mientras tanto, en las ciudades del destierro, en aquel destierro que fue tu aborrecido y elegido instrumento, el arma de tu arte, erigías tus arduos laberintos, infinitesimales e infinitos, admirablemente mezquinos, más populosos que la historia. Habremos muerto sin haber divisado la biforme fiera o la rosa que son el centro de tu délado, pero la memoria tiene sus talismanes, sus ecos de Virgilio, y así en las calles de la noche perduran tus infiernos espléndidos, tantas cadencias y metáforas tuyas, los oros de tu sombra. ¿Qué importa nuestra cobardía si hay en la tierra un solo hombre valiente? ¿Qué importa la tristeza si hubo en el tiempo alguien que se dijo feliz? ¿Qué importa mi perdida generación, ese vago espejo, si tus libros la justifican? Yo soy los otros, yo soy todos aquellos que ha rescatado tu obstinado rigor, soy los que no conoces y los que salvas. Far be it from me to denigrate the monumental worth of James Joyce's work. I agree that his is the literature of transcendental importance from the 1920s. What I'm not in full agreement with is the assessment of the imagismo, el cubismo, los conventículos y sectas. Borges has made many other comments critical of his early literary activities as well. And from Borges' point of view, I guess that makes me a crédulo universitario. Although I would rather consider myself as open-minded and appreciative. In spite of risking the credulous label, and in spite of the time limitations here, I came to listen to Borges too. I would like to briefly resuscitate the major concerns and a few representative poems from this period with a view toward at least hinting at some real worth and interest inherent in those avant-garde poems. First, a very general background. A brief explosion of avant-garde poetry occurred in Buenos Aires in the 1920s as a result of theories and enthusiasm brought back from Europe by Borges himself. He is known, as he has said, as the father of Argentine ultraism, a title he would probably like to disclaim.
Well, of course. I'm supposed to be a gentleman, but Borges.
The ultraist aesthetic, a conscious derivation from the general characteristics of earlier avant-garde literary movements in Europe, was expressed by Borges in following points. I'll read two of them. Reducción de la lírica a su elemento primordial, la metáfora, and síntesis de dos o más imágenes en una, que ensancha así su facultad de sugerencia. Los poemas ultraístas constan, pues, de una serie de metáforas, cada una de las cuales tiene sugestividad propia y compendia una visión inédita de algún fragmento de la vida. There is evidently a certain amount of frenetic activity connected with being an ultraist. Borges and his group of young poets published a series of short-lived magazines in which they demonstrated their new approach to art. The first of these, Prisma, in 1921, was a revista mural, published in single sheets and literally pasted up on walls throughout Buenos Aires. The first of these issues contained a wildly exuberant and overblown ultra-proclamation which, among other things, pointedly proclaimed their chief poetic recourse: hemos sintetizado la poesía en su elemento primordial, la metáfora, a la que concedemos una máxima independencia más allá de los jueguitos de aquellos que comparan entre sí cosas de forma semejante, equiparando con un círculo a la luna. Cada verso de nuestros poemas posee su vida individual y representa una visión inédita. Not wishing to embarrass Borges, I'll read
I
no
am
more
very
from this.
embarrassed too.
I'll read no more from that proclamation.
I
Borges,
blush.
Borges is fully justified in wishing to live down some of these obviously excessive outbursts. The poetry from this period is another matter, however. The most important collections of poetry from the authors of altruist persuasion were Borges' Fervor de Buenos Aires, Luna de Enfrente, and Cuaderno San Martín. Eduardo González Lanuzas, Prismas in 1924, Francisco Luis Bernardes Alcántara, 1925, Leopoldo Marechal, Días con Flechas, 1926, and an undeservedly little-known collection of poetry, El Cencerro de Cristal, published 10 years earlier by Ricardo Guiraldes, author of the Gauchesque masterpiece novel Don Segundo Sombra. Now, a quick look at a few brief poems which will give you at least an idea of the delightful and incisive images which these poets were capable of developing. First, a poem from González Lanuzas' Prismas, a veritable showcase of altruist technique and its limitations. That is, a poem is to be, ideally, a depersonalized, deshumanizado series of metaphors or images. Now, Aurora, which is on the second page of the poem. Mañana somnolienta, parpadean las luces de los arcos en el velorio de la noche muerta. Las calles solitarias en la fatalidad de su bostezo, ahora enjutas de ruidos, ríos secos, la luna que se acaba es un recuerdo. Tranvías, puñados vivos de ciudad sonámbulos. Han sido degollados nuestros sueños por el alfanje vivo del oriente. Technically, this is a very limited poem. Each verse is an image, and these images are formed here either through personification or metaphor. Almost everything in the poem is given personal attributes. The morning is sleepy, streetlights blink, night is dead, streets yawn, the moon dies, the streetcars are sleepy fists, our dreams have had their throats cut, and this was done by the living cutlass, the sun. There are several metaphors. The streets are dry rivers. The moon is a memory. Streetcars are living handfuls of sleepwalking city. Admittedly, this poem could be looked at as a series of isolated, or at best, tenuously linked images, as a collection of gregarias, as it were. For me, though, the poem is effective as a whole. Besides the single theme, morning in the city, which links the images, the poet uses the motifs of sleep and death to give strength and depth to this descriptive process. The sleepiness attendant to the morning is indicated by the words somnolienta, parpadean, bostezos, sonámbulos, sueños. The images of death are evoked by the terms velorio, muerta, fatalidad, enjuta, se acaba, degollados, and by the instrument of death, the alfanje. As in any of the altruist poems, some of the images are more felicitous than others. I find those of the first 5 lines and the image of the streetcar as living sleepwalking fistfuls of city, particularly imaginative and successful. Now a Borges poem. In contrast to González Lanuza and other of the altruists, one has to look hard through Borges' first 3 collections in order to find a few poems that are really altruistic in spirit and technique. This in spite of the fact that it was he who brought the Fuego Ardiente and proclamations of altruist theory to his compatriots, an apparent contradiction. In my view, there is only one poem in the 3 books which is a completely faithful, in a technical sense, altruist poem, Singladura from Luna de Enfrente. The one I have chosen to reproduce here is Un Patio from Fervor de Buenos Aires. Un patio. Con la tarde se cansaron los 2 o 3 colores del patio. La gran franqueza de la luna llena ya no entusiasma su habitual firmamento. Patio, cielo encalzado. El patio es el declive por el cual se derraman el cielo en la casa. Serena la eternidad espera en la encrucijada de estrellas. Lindo es vivir en la amistad oscura de un zaguán, de una parra y de un aljibe. Now, technically, this is a good Altarist poem. The most frequently occurring poetic recourse in the Fervor collection is the personification of various inanimate objects, generally through adjectives and verbs which denote human characteristics and functions. This happens several times in Un Patio, beginning with the first lines. As the afternoon passed, the colors in the patio became tired. The full moon's frankness cannot make enthusiastic its habitual firmamento, which in turn is presumed to be able to become enthusiastic. Now come two metaphorically based visual images of the patio itself. The patio is the bedded sky. The patio is also the slope down which the sky is slid into the house. Both of these images underline the importance of the patio for the poet as the link between the openness of the sky and the confines of the house. The sky also becomes here a solid and tractable or manageable element which further increases the level of the imagery, making it even more fantastic. The two sky patio metaphors are followed by the eternity which waits serenely in the juncture of the stars. And as a result of the association of patio with the sky, we infer that eternity is felt to be an aspect of the patio as well. We have thus far been led through a progressive description of the patio as holder of the afternoon's colors, as the moon's habitat, as the sky's bed, as the conductor of the sky into the house itself, and as a result of this last function, it endows the whole house with an aspect of eternity. After this grand progression through the cosmic characteristics of a Buenos Aires house, the final two lines of the poem serve as what seems to me a typically Borgesian disclaimer. It's nice to live in the dark friendship of an entryway, a great funny in this history, a return from cosmic comparisons to the mundane reactions of a familiar home. As I mentioned earlier, some of the best poems which adhere totally to the Altarist aesthetic, written by an Argentine, precede by several years the formal statement of this aesthetic. I mean, of course, Guiraldes and Cerro poems. The poem Lucero, which you have before you, is a fairly evident sample. The whole poem is a series of metaphors for the title, Lucero, or Morning Star. There are, to be sure, better and more interesting poems in this collection, and at its best, Guiraldes' poetry exemplifies the qualities which make the later work of Borges and his contemporaries of interest to me. A great good humor, delightful and audacious metaphors, a world of fantastic images, and, in spite of their pretensions toward depersonalizing art, an often sensitive evocation of lo argentino. Now, I would like to hear Borges discuss Guiraldes' influence on the other poets of his generation, the influence both as a man and as a poet. I know how Borges feels about Guiraldes, and then I would like to know if he agrees with me that the best Altarist poems hold value and interest for us today. And I'm afraid I know how Borges may feel about that as well.
But I think of Guiraldes as a fine man. Guiraldes wrote Don Segundo Sombra, a book that may be compared to Shane. But Guiraldes was a disciple of Lugones. What happened to Ultres was that we were not wrong to find out that the whole thing had been done way back in 1907 by Lugones, far better than what we could do. So that really we were all disciples of Lugones. We were, let's say, intractable and unwilling disciples of Lugones, but we knew that Lugones had worked the same thing some 20 years before, but the Lunario Sentimental was quite beyond our possibilities. And I suppose that's the reason why Ultraism disintegrated. The fact that we thought of ourselves as being revolutionaries, and we were being merely tardy disciples of a Lugones, but Lugones himself had left behind. He had written other things. Guiraldes, of course, Cerro de Cristal is an obvious, I should say, imitation of the Lunario. You take Guiraldes' poem on the moon, that is meant, as I say, what is an imitation of el lunario sentimental. And we found out that, that the idea that the metaphor is essential to poetry had been proclaimed by Lugones in the foreword to his Lunario Sentimental, published, I should say, in 1907. Now, as to a statement that the metaphor is essential to poetry, I suppose that is obviously wrong, since, let's say in the case of, well, popular poetry, ballad poetry, we find no metaphors. I say that the idea of a metaphor is rather a literary idea. I mean, it is not essential to poetry. For were we to find a single line of poetry without a metaphor, then that should allow the statement that the metaphor is not essential. And of course, we can find a great many. So I suppose that what happened to ultraismo was the fact that we all felt, we were all made to feel, that our great revolution was merely a resurrection of Lugones' past. And he thought about it in the same way. But of course, I don't like speaking in this way, since I think of that time, I think of many fine friendships I had, I think how intimately we thought of poetry, how we're not thinking in terms of ourselves but of poetry, how we tried to think that what we had written was good, how we were good comrades, how we praised each other. At the same time we felt that the whole thing was our poetry, and I don't suppose a single survivor of that time who does not think of his youth in that way, or of that time in that way. I don't suppose González Hernuza cares anything about what he wrote in those days. I don't either. Huidaldes, when he came to Segundo Sombra, thought that the Cencerro de Cristal was in his contempt. Well, Lugones, who invented the whole thing, you might say, though of course he came, well, Lugones was in a sense begotten by Esteban Laforgue. Well, Lugones went on to writing other things that were better. Because after all, El Lunario Sentimental is a very fine, skillful book, but it's not an intimate book. Lugones is telling us very little about him, or about his feelings, except in two admirable stories, in Abuela Julieta. Well, it's not one, I don't remember it now. Abuela Julieta is a very fine, pathetic story. But Lugones, of course, went far beyond that, and in the end, he wrote very simple and very effective verse. For example, when he wrote about his forefathers, and he said, que nuestra tierra quiera salvarnos del olvido por estos 4 siglos que en ella hemos servido. But you will find a single metaphor there, and it is fine poetry. So they suppose that the ground theory of ultraismo was wrong. And besides, it was the kind of theory that the Scalds had, that the conceptistas had, that I suppose some of the French symbolists had. And the theory, it was absolutely wrong. So of course I may feel sentimental when I think in terms of ultraismo, but really most people, they were quite right. They shook their heads, because when they read our newfangled poetry, they said, well, all this has been done by Lugones and forgotten, and perhaps worthily forgotten. So why should you say that this is new? Of course we know that it wasn't. You were reading Lugones all the time. There's a very strange thing. We wanted to be rid of Lugones. We felt the power of Lugones. We felt his gravitation. At the same time, we felt that in order to live, in order to go on living, we had to be independent of him. And yet, the only thing that we could do was to imitate him, and to call that imitation ultraismo, which of course was senseless. But when you're a young man, I suppose you're not too logical. And when you're an old man, I don't think you're logical either. No? You're being illogical all the time. But I must thank you, sir, for a very generous reading of quite shabby verse.
Does anybody care to make any comment or ask any questions?
I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to ask Mr. Borey, when you get an idea for a poem, is it something you work through to the bitter end, or does it brew for weeks, months?
No. When I get an idea for a poem, then if the idea is an allowable one, then the poem has its will with me. I mean, if the poem insists on being written down, then I write it. But the process may be a slow one or a quick one. For example, I wrote a very short poem, some 7 or 8 lines in free verse, called Limits. I ascribed them to an imaginary Montevidean poet. Este platero Edo. And then I forgot it, and then years and years afterwards, there came to me the idea that I might write a real poem. And then I wrote the poem Limites, which is, I think, one of my best poems. But the idea had come to me, I should say, some 10 years before. But at that time, I felt I was unable to cope with it. So I merely jotted it down, I published it in an anthology as the work of an imaginary Uruguayan poet. Then I went back to it and I wrote it. But sometimes the thing happens in a very short time, and sometimes it may take weeks. I mean, all those things are beyond me. I have no method whatever of working. I let poems or tales happen to me. And if they don't happen, then what can I do about it? I have to sit back and wait. And they come, inevitably they come.
Are there any questions? I'd like to ask one, if I may. I noticed that in most of the discussions, a certain modernity. We've been talking mainly about the 20th century, also the 19th. I'd like to know
But
your...
personally, I prefer the 19th to the 20th century.
You seem to... The 19th seems to be...
Well, of course. I don't know if I'm speaking of Shaw,
Yes.
of Kipling, of Chesterton. I don't know where I should place them, really. I'm not aware of it. Of course, in the case of Browning, I know where I can place them. But in the case of Frost, for example, both he's a 20th century poet. And yet somehow, I think of Frost as I think of Browning. I think that the two can go together in some strange way. I don't like people who are professionally modern. Those are generally charlatans.
What I had in mind was before the 19th century. The only references I recall that were made before the 19th century was something about Quevedo or perhaps Góngora writing Latin and Spanish.
Yes.
And the first Quixote being not quite up to the
No,
second.
not at all.
How about the monuments to the language, say the Cid, the Arcipreste, the Celestino? I'd like to hear a little discussion about that if you care.
Well, I can hardly discuss them since I've been defeated by them. I've attempted the Cid. I found the whole thing was too slow. And besides, I think the rhyming scheme is wrong. You can't have a stanza with 4 rhymes. For example, you can't have stanzas the way you get them in the Rubaiyat, where there's a pause. For example, awake for morning in the bowl of night, has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight, and lo, the hunter of the east has caught the Sultan's turret in an ooze of light. Where there you have that fine, free 3rd line. But I don't think a poem can be written with 4 rhymes. I think that's far too heavy. At least it's too heavy for my ear. And the story itself, somehow I was never interested in the Cid. He's not a likable character. And I think that if you don't like a character, if you can't be fond of him, then I suppose the reading is impossible. I wonder, perhaps one tends to sympathize with the Arabs or with the Moors rather than with the Spaniards. At least I do. Those are far more civilized. They must have been better men.
Any questions? I realize a statement like this can be invidious, but...
Yes. Well, of course, I'm making sweeping statements. When one makes a
I don't mean your statement, I mean my
it has to be a
question.
sweeping statement. Especially on a podium, they have to go on for sweeping statements.
I was going to ask you within Spanish, which are, say, your favorite poets? In other words, perhaps Garcilaso or San Juan de la Cruz?
No, I should say Fray Luis de León.
Right.
I think Fray Luis de León. Because he seems there is a serenity about him. In the case of Góngora, after all, suppose when Góngora began writing, he was a fine poet, and then he went in for being a kind of, for experimenting, not to successor, I should say. Remember, when Góngora writes, peinar el viento, fatigar la selva. Fatigar la selva is fine. But of course, he craved that from Virgil. But the idea of peinar el viento is obviously absurd. But he had to do that in order to get a parallel. Peinar el viento is quite bad. The idea of combing the wind is not only an outrageous metaphor, but a very pointless one. But of course, he needed that because he wanted it to be like Virgil, and then he translated Silvas que fatigaveros, he wove it into his form, and he got that fine line, fatigar la selva. Of course, he picked that from Virgil. But of course, when I think of Góngora, I like to think of those, for example, of the sonnet. O excelso muro, torres levantadas de honor, de majestad, de gallardía, oh gran río, gran rey de Andalucía, de arenas nobles, ya que no doradas. That's a very fine sonnet. And there's also a very fine sonnet of Góngora, which is both the best sonnet of Quevedo, though Góngora wrote it. That one about mal te perdonaron a ti las horas que limando están los días que royendo están los años. There you got the noble ring of Quevedo, and he did before Quevedo. So it had written name, Quevedo's best sonnet, I should choose that sonnet written by Góngora. Because literature is full of those paradoxes. Because the best man's work was written on somebody else. But I should say Fray Luis de León and, well, Manrique. Manrique's couples are very fine. And, well, as to modern Spanish poetry, suppose we'll think in terms of the brothers Machado, of Cancinos Assens. I think Lorca is quite a minor poet, a decorative poet. And then there's some, well, I shouldn't quote, I should be quoting Argentine poets, but I think Enrique Vance was a very fine poet. And Lugones occasionally was a fine poet. Though he was too conscious a writer. I mean, he knew that he was writing verse all the time. He took great pains for the metaphors, the adjectives. That made a certain artificial character. Then he had bad taste also. And then we had Almafuerte. Almafuerte was a man of genius, but one of incredibly bad taste also. So you could, at any moment, ugliness may be expected, and you generally get it. We really have done theoretical reading in Spanish poetry. So I'm not a fair judge of it. I was never attracted to it because I felt that since Spanish was in my blood, I had no need of looking for it in books. I felt that after all, Spanish is my mother tongue, the only tongue I can cope with. Bueno, no sé si puedo explicárselo, si puedo explicármelo. Yo diría que todo eso corresponde a la filosofía idealista. Si suponemos que toda la realidad es un sueño, podemos suponer, esto sería el solipsismo, que hay un solo soñador y ese soñador es usted, o en mi caso soy yo, y que cada uno de nosotros sueña el espacio astronómico, sueña la historia del universo, sueña la geografía, sueña su niñez, sueña sus mayores. Bueno, o si no, podemos suponer, esto vendría a ser la idea hindú, que el universo es un sueño de Brahma, que hay un Dios que está soñándonos y que existimos como forma de su sueño. Ahora, esta segunda idea fue la que yo tuve cuando escribió el cuento de las runas circulares. Ahí yo imagino un mago que quiere soñar a otro hombre y al principio se equivoca, sueña muchos, luego sueña uno, va soñando los de adentro, sueña el corazón del tamaño del puño, luego va soñando la sangre, el pelo le da mucho trabajo, al final sueña el rostro, ese rostro lo mira, y luego, una vez que lo ha soñado, una vez que el otro ya existe de un modo macizo, entonces lo manda a otro templo. Y luego ocurre una experiencia que no recuerdo, y él descubre que él a su vez es el sueño de otro brujo. Y podemos suponer que el número, en todo caso queda mejor así literariamente, y además es el único modo de justificar el cuento, podemos suponer que esa cadena de brujos es infinita, que no hay un primer brujo y que no habrá nunca un último brujo, ya que cada uno sueña a otro hombre y la mayoría de ellos ignoran que han sido soñados a su vez. Yo creo que esa es la explicación, pero no sé si un cuento necesita explicación. Es decir, si a usted le ha interesado la lectura, el cuento está justificado. Si no le ha interesado, cualquier explicación que yo le dé será innecesario o será inútil.
Any other question? Mr. White?
Sir, along the lines of dreams, what do you think of the author Julio Cortázar, and how would you differentiate yourself from him in terms of the concept of what is real and what is not real?
I didn't quite catch the question. You could explain it? You could repeat it, sir. I didn't quite catch what you said.
Would you repeat it slowly?
Yes.
My question was, the author Julio Cortázar also writes a great deal of dreams and what is real and what is not real, and that unreality or irreality or reality, in fact, is very subjective. I'm curious to know, sir, what you feel of Cortázar, and if you're familiar with his works, and how you would differentiate yourself from him.
Well, I can hardly answer you, sir. I have hardly read Cortázar. I met him once, a very nice and a very shy man, but we did not speak of literature. But I remember, however, and I'm glad to say so, that the first story of Cortázar to be published in Buenos Aires was published by me, because of editing a magazine. He came along with his story, a very fine story called Casa Tomada, where a house is invaded, perhaps by demons, perhaps by ghosts, perhaps by some, indefinite, by some dim presence, and then the people who live in the house will leave it. Well, I published that story in a magazine I was editing. Then I forgot all about it, and then I had dinner with Cortázar in Paris, and he said, Borges, he said, I'm always very grateful to you. And I said, why? I said, I wonder if you remember that I came to you with a story, and then it all came back to me. But I did not know they had never published anything before. Of course, when the first time you find something of yours in print, that means a great deal to you. So Cortázar had that kind of memory of me, but I cannot read his books. I cannot speak about them. I only know that story. You see, being blind, I go in for very little reading, and as you say, for no contemporary reading.
Are there any other questions? There's one back there, please.
Well, you mentioned that you had two mystical experiences in your life, and what do you think that you would please tell us about them, or would that be personal?
You said before you said you had two mystical experiences. Would you care to tell us about them, or is that too personal?
No. Besides, I've told all about them. I wrote a poem on the one, and I wrote, an account of it in prose on the other. Those were, the first came through logic. I had gone back to the to outside of Buenos Aires where I had lived as a boy. And then I came to a rather muddy stream called the Arroyo Maldonado. I remember must have been about midnight. And then I saw the shabby houses. I saw the stream itself, a bridge. I felt, well, the open spaces. I felt that I was, let's say, in a suburb, that I was on the edge of the city. And I said to myself, this place is exactly as I remember it years and years ago. And then I said to myself, rather I felt, if I have the same feeling, then this means that time does not exist. Since this repetition is not a repetition, I'm really, what I'm feeling now is what I felt then. So you might think of them as being the same, as being identical. And then after thinking that, and that was merely abstract, after thinking that, I felt it. I felt that somehow that moment was timeless to me. And that lasted, I don't know how long it lasted, it was timeless. And then the other experience was a different kind. The other experience was, well, I had been unhappy over something or another. No need to go into the details. And I was walking on one of the bridges, at the railway bridge. And then I saw trains were going. I saw the smoke. And then suddenly this feeling came over me. It was not a thought. It was more than that. It was a feeling. I felt I am unhappy. But unhappiness has been given me as all other experiences are given me, in order that I should make that unhappiness into beauty, that I should write a poem. And then when I wrote the poem, I went over the many experiences of my life, and then I thought that I was quite unworthy, since many things had been given to me, even unhappiness, and I had not written the poem. But the moment when I felt of those many things being given to me, that did not come to me as a concept. It came to me as a feeling. And that moment was also timeless, in a way. So I wrote it down. Those are the only, quite modest, I should say, mystical experiences I've had. Of course, I don't pretend to be Swedenborg or William Blake or San Juan de la Cruz. No, nothing of the kind. But those are the two experiences that have been allowed me. And in a sense, they were very intense. In fact, I know they were intense. Since, for example, when I had the second experience, I was feeling very unhappy. But when that experience came, I thought that my unhappiness had been given me as a means to beauty, as a means to poetry. And that I should be grateful for my happiness, since after all I was giving material and tools for my craft of verse. Well, that's all I can say.
En las ruinas circulares me pareció que usted quería decirnos que el hombre era como el sueño de un Dios dormido, pero realmente no entiendo si usted cree en Dios o qué idea tiene de Dios.
No, personalmente no creo. Pero creo que hay, desde luego, es imposible negar que hay algo, pero ese algo podría ser el ímpetu vital de Bergson, la voluntad de Schopenhauer, la fuerza vital, la life force de Shaw, y eso, desde luego, no es lo mismo que un Dios personal, ya que ese Dios viviría en cada uno de nosotros, y no solo en cada uno de nosotros, sino en cada una de las cosas del universo. Pero esto podría compendiarse en la frase de Shaw, God is in the making. Es decir, Dios no es algo que está, digamos, está en el principio. Dios es algo que estamos creando. Y supongo que si obramos de un modo justo, que si tratamos de ser inteligentes, que si somos razonables, estamos ayudando de algún modo a la creación de Dios, ya que somos, en este momento, todos somos una parte de Dios. Y podemos hacer algo, si quiere ínfimo, para colaborar en ese crecimiento divino.
Are there any other questions?
I enjoyed your comments yesterday on circular rooms, and for me, I enjoy it more than any of your stories. I was curious to know if your arrival at the prehistoric setting of that story was how you arrived at it. If that was, if you came upon it immediately, or it took a while.
No,
Like that.
I think that came to me out of a sentence to be found in Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass, where the Red King is dreaming Alice. I think that may have been the hint. Well, the story, I suppose, goes beyond that. Now, when I wrote that story, for the only time in my life, I was caught up and carried away by it. As you say, I was living my everyday life. The writing took me a week. I'm a very slow and a very, well, clumsy writer. The writing took me a week, and during that week, I thought that my everyday life was unreal. The only real thing was that story of the dreamer dreamt. That is the only real thing. And that lasted until I wrote the very last sentence of the story. And then after that I was let down with a thump. I might say no into everyday life. Well, I suppose I wrote that story quite soon after I got there, after I invented the scheme. And in that story, something curious happens. Is that the dreamer begins, well, he begins doing things wrongly. For example, he begins by committing a mistake. You remember that in the beginning, he invents a vast crowd of men. And then he finds out that nothing can be done with them, that they're not coming alive. And so he blots them out, and he begins working on a single man. But that happened because at first I thought I might do something with a dreamer inventing, with a dreamer begetting, or with a dreamer dreaming, many men, and then choosing one. But then of course I saw that would be of no avail to me. And then I thought, well, since I've written that this man was dreaming, well, suppose hundreds of men, I suppose the best thing to do would be to leave that and then to say that he repented of it. So that in a sense, the story is about the story. I mean, the evolution of the writing is to be found inside the story. Because suppose as I am the dreamer, both things have to go together. But I think that makes for the reality. I mean, you can believe that the man actually was able to dream up another man because of the mistake he committed at first. Because that mistake makes him into a human being, into a believable being.
I think it's safe to say that we've all come to know and to love Jorge Luis Borges from our 2 days' experience with him, and I would disagree with him on only one point. He only said he had 4 or 5 friends. I think perhaps you have many more than that.
Oh yes, of course. I mean personal
I know
friends.
what you mean.
I have many unknown and invisible friends.
Yeah.
In fact, in a sense, all America seems to be.
Well, you're far more than
Seems
that.
to be my friend. Thank you very much.
You've been putting up with my comments on your early poetry.
No, that's right. I just like it.